Top 10 different ways the late sovereign Elizabeth II's demise will be strange. 10 previous royal deaths have gone terribly. Jamie Frater. Jamie founded Listverse due to an insatiable desire to share fascinating, obscure, and bizarre facts. He has been a guest speaker on numerous national radio and television stations and is a 5-time published author. The Queen is dead. Today, on September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II has died at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Elizabeth II was queen since 1952. In that time, she made that title utterly her own. Now that the beloved monarch has died, it might surprise you that we know exactly what will happen next. The world's governments and media have been preparing for it for decades. Note, when this article was written, the Queen was still alive. Consequently, the present tense is used liberally throughout. Despite a reputation for pomp and circumstance, previous royal funerals and ceremonies have been disasters. At the funeral of Princess Charlotte, the undertakers were drunk. George IV needed to hire prize fighters at his coronation to stop the distinguished but belligerent guests from hitting each other. It was so cold when the Duke of York was buried in 1827 that the Foreign Secretary got rheumatic fever and the Bishop of London died. Even Queen Victoria's coronation was unimpressive. The clergy forgot their words, and the coronation ring didn't fit. Even as recently as 2002, there have been significant blunders in royal ceremonies. When the Queen Mother died, over 250 commercial radio stations were unable to announce the news. The plan was to send an automated obit signal immediately after the official announcement. This would allow them to be some of the first broadcasters to break the news. However, in what one insider succinctly described as an enormous cock-up, someone pressed the wrong button and the announcement was not sent. As a result, 258 radio stations were left completely in the dark about one of the biggest news events of the year. The last time that a British monarch died, which was in 1952, the news was conveyed using the code words Hyde Park Corner. This was to prevent switchboard operators from finding out and leaking the news early. The Queen Mother's funeral plans were similarly referred to under the code name Operation Taybridge. For Elizabeth II, the plans for her passing are named Operation London Bridge and read like a manual for a secret military operation. The Prime Minister will be awakened, if asleep, and told by civil servants that London Bridge is down. 2. This cryptic code phrase signifies that the Queen is dead, although we wonder what they'll say if the actual London Bridge collapses. Things could get pretty confusing if the Queen dies in a bridge collapse. Next, the Foreign Office's Global Response Center will send the news from a secret location via closed channels to the 15 foreign governments where the Queen is a head of state. The news will also be sent to the 36 nations of the Commonwealth where the Queen serves as a symbolic figurehead. For all this secrecy, chances are the rest of the world will find out only moments later. The Press Association will receive the news of her death within an hour of the Prime Minister. When the Queen joins the great majority, it will be the largest funeral of all time, if not the most viewed event in human history. Diana's death had more than 1 million people turning out in person to watch the funeral procession. Worldwide, there were as many as 2.5 billion people watching on TV. By all estimates, the Queen's funeral is expected to absolutely dwarf these figures. George VI had 305,000 subjects visit his coffin to pay their respects, creating a line that was 6.4 kilometers, 4 miles, long. Current predictions for the Queen's funeral estimate at least 500,000 mourners. That's 500,000 people queuing up to enter a single room. An entire nation will alter its appearance as the royal bureaucracy kicks into gear. Public TV screens will be erected across the country so that people can watch the funeral. Almost all flags will be lowered to half-mast, and almost all businesses and shops will close. Foreign dignitaries from around the world will abandon their plans so that they can visit a tiny, wet island in the North Atlantic instead. Watch this video on YouTube. Britain will use all the tradition, pomp, and ceremony it can muster, essentially turning back time by 200 years. Horses, carriages, cannons, and traditional military uniforms will flood the streets of London, while the air will fill with the sound of tolling church bells. Old systems, traditions, and ceremonies will be revived. 4. Some have not been seen in over 6 decades, if at all. Even the official announcement will be made by a royal footman pinning a notice on the palace gates, informing passers-by of the monarch's death. The media is no exception to this revival of old customs, as the BBC will activate RATS. This stands for Radio Alert Transmission System, or Royal About to Snuff It as it's sometimes jokingly called in the BBC offices. Designed during the Cold War to withstand an attack on Britain's communications network, RATS has become legendary among the BBC staff. Most employees have only seen it during tests, and many have never seen it work at all. Bear in mind, this is a nation which recently had to delay the opening of Parliament by several days because the ink hadn't dried on the goatskin parchment from which the opening speech would be read. The UK is not afraid to look old-fashioned for the sake of a good show. The Queen herself understands the importance of old-fashioned theatrics. "I have to be seen to be believed" is supposedly one of her catchphrases, which amusingly implies that the Queen has many catchphrases. Watch this video on YouTube. Operation London Bridge is meticulously planned out, often down to the minute. For instance, Prince Charles will be officially proclaimed king at 11 a.m. the day after the Queen's death. On the day of the funeral, Big Ben will strike at 9 a.m., and the coffin will reach Westminster Abbey's doors at 11 a.m.
Elizabeth II becomes the longest-reigning monarch in British history.
Other governments have their
Elizabeth
secretive
II was
arrangements.
born on April 21,
Ottawa's federal
1926,
government
in
refuses
London,
to reveal
England,
their
to
plan
Prince
for the
Albert,
Queen's
Duke
death,
of York,
reserving
later
it
King
for
George
cabinet
VI,
ministers and
and
senior
Elizabeth
advisors.
Leon.
Almost every
In
media outlet
1947,
also has
she married
drills and
Philip
systems in
Mountbatten,
place to
Duke of
prepare in
Edinburgh,
case the
with
reigning
whom she had
monarch
4
assumes
children,
room temperature.
Charles, Prince of Wales,
Radio
and Princess
stations
Royal,
have pre-arranged
Prince Andrew,
playlists of
and Prince
appropriately
Edward.
somber music.
Elizabeth
Chris Price of
II
BBC
ascended the
Radio
throne after
1
her
has
father's
claimed that
death
if
on
you ever
February
hear the
6,
song Haunted Dance Hall
1952.
Nursery
Her
Remix
coronation took
by
place
Savers
on
of
June
Paradise
2,
in the video above,
1953.
then some horrific event or major death has just occurred.
During her
TV
reign,
schedules
Elizabeth
can be
II
changed
saw the
at a
British
moment's
Empire
notice to remove any
transformed
risque
into the
humor on the
Commonwealth of
fateful
Nations,
day.
a free association
Comedy
of
will
equal
still
and
be
independent
broadcast,
states.
but most
She also
satirical or
witnessed the
dark humor will
decolonization
be
of
taken
Africa
off
and
the
Asia
air.
and the breakup of the Soviet
Media
Union.
organizations the world over are
Elizabeth
ready to go.
II made numerous state visits
For
and toured
example,
extensively throughout the
CNN has a
world.
number of pre-recorded
In
packages on the
1992, she
Queen's
and the
life,
Duke of Edinburgh
which can be broadcast
celebrated their
immediately
40th
after they're
wedding
notified
anniversary
of
with a tour
Elizabeth's
of
death.
Canada and the United States.
British
In
newspapers like
2002,
the Times are
she
rumored to
celebrated
have
her
up to
Golden
11
Jubilee,
days worth of
marking 50
articles
years on the
prepared.
throne, with visits to
Broadcasters
various
Sky
Commonwealth
News
countries.
and ITN have regular
Elizabeth
rehearsals
II
and
was
drills,
created Dame
referring
Grand
to the
Cross
Queen
of
as
the Order
Mrs.
of the British Empire in
Robinson,
1945.
and many
And in
channels already have
1953,
contracts
she
with
has
royal
proclaimed
experts
Queen
for
Elizabeth
exclusive
II,
interviews.
Defender of the Faith.
Every
In
broadcaster needs to
1957,
be
she was
prepared
given the
because
title
they
of
know
head
they'll
of the
be under
Commonwealth.
incredible scrutiny.
Accession
When
to
the
the
Queen
throne.
Mother died, newsreader Peter
The late
Sissons
King
happened to be
George
wearing
VI's
a red
health
tie
began
and
to
was
seriously
promptly
decline in
hounded
the
by the
summer of
national media
1951.
for his apparent
Princess
disrespect.
Elizabeth represented him on
He was
various
caught
state
red-handed
occasions.
or at least
In October
red-tied.
1951,
Sissons and
Elizabeth
the
and her
BBC
husband,
in
Prince
general
Philip,
were also
embarked
accused
on a
of not
highly
providing
successful
enough
tour of Canada
information
and
and
Washington,
treating it as
D.C.
just
They
another
returned
news
to England
story.
for Christmas, and then set out for a
6.
tour of
This
Australia
incident
and
was
New Zealand
hugely influential in how the
January
British media
1952.
present celebrity deaths. Now,
However,
in
they
the
had to
age
cut
of
their trip
social
short
media,
when they
the
received
judgment
news
will be
that
even
King George
harsher.
VI had died on February
Most news
6,
channels have black
1952.
formal wear on hand
Elizabeth,
24/7
now
in
Queen,
case of a
flew
sudden
back
death.
to England immediately.
When word broke of Queen
The first
Elizabeth
3 months of her
II's
reign
failing
were spent
health,
mourning for her
news
father.
anchors were
She
instructed
began
to
to
change
undertake
into
the
black
routine
clothing.
duties of the sovereign and
Top
carry out her
10 ways
first
the
state
late
opening
Queen
Parliament on
Elizabeth
November 4,
II's death will be
1952.
bizarre.
Her coronation
By
was
the
held
time
at
they
Westminster
announced the
Abbey
Queen's
on
death,
June 2,
black suits,
1953.
ties, and the like were pervasive
modern
among the
monarchy.
media.
House of Windsor.
Programs will stop.
The British
networks
royal
will merge,
family's last
and
name was
pre-written
changed
scripts
to
will be
Windsor
read
in
aloud.
1917 when
Then the
anti-German
royal
sentiment
standard will be
was
shown,
at its height
and the
during
national
World War
anthem
I.
will play.
The House of Windsor is
All
the royal house of the
commentary and
United
discussion
Kingdom,
will be
which
saved for later
succeeded
so
the House
that
of
the
Hanover
networks can't
after
be
the death
accused of
Queen
being
Victoria in
disrespectful.
1901.
Huge swaths of British
During the
culture rely
anti-German
upon
atmosphere
Queen
of World War
Elizabeth's
I,
identity.
George V
She
declared by
became
royal
Queen while
proclamation,
Truman was President
July
of the
17,
United States and Stalin was leader of the
that all
Soviet Union.
descendants of Queen Victoria
Her
male
face
line
adorns
who
British
were
currency,
also British
while her
subjects
insignia
would
sits
adopt
on
the
the
surname
uniforms
Windsor.
of the police and the military.
Britain's
The
colonies
British
began to
national
rapidly
anthem is
gain
literally
independence in
named
the
after her.
1960s,
God save the
with
Queen.
Elizabeth II coming to the throne
this will
just
have to
before
change.
this historical event.
New currency will be
While Britain
printed
still
immediately.
possessed over
The
70
national
overseas
anthem will
territories
change
at
to
this
God
time,
Save the King.
it was clear that the
Passports will be
empire was not
replaced.
going to last.
Military insignia will be
India,
updated.
which was
New
once
stamps
referred to
will be
as
printed,
the jewel
and
in the
even
crown
minor
of the British
things like
Empire,
mailboxes
had
will have
already
to be
gained
altered.
independence 5 years before
When Elizabeth II became Queen,
In
mailboxes in
1952,
Scotland were
British
vandalized.
troops were fighting uprisings in
This is
Egypt and
because
Kenya.
Scotland never
Both
had a
of these
Queen
countries
Elizabeth
eventually won their
I, as
independence.
England and Scotland were
The empire
independent at the
continued
time.
to shrink over the years, with
Scottish
Hong Kong
people were
eventually being
angry that
transferred to
English
China
history
in
was seen as
1997.
more important than theirs.
Elizabeth II's son,
The
now King
immediate
Charles
cost of the
II,
Queen's death will be
referred
huge.
to this event as the end of the
The UK
empire.
economy will lose
The British
billions
Empire
from
has been
lost working
criticized for its
hours,
contribution
not
to
to mention
slavery,
the costs of the funeral
particularly in
and
the
the next
sugar-producing
coronation.
islands of the Caribbean,
In
and the
the
movement of
12
African
days
people
after
for
Elizabeth's
profit.
passing, shops and
It is
banks across
estimated
the
that 12
country will
million
close as an
Africans
act
were
of
captured
mourning and
and
respect.
transported into slavery.
Both
with
the
at
Queen's
least
funeral
one-third of
and
these
Prince
carried in
Charles's
British
coronation will become national
Throughout the
holidays,
18th and
each
19th
costing the
centuries,
economy
the huge
between
sugar
£1,
plantations across the Caribbean
$2 billion and
provided
$6
around
billion
80% of the sugar consumed in
While the
Western Europe.
predicted influx of
Relying on
tourists may
slavery to
offset some
complete
of
the
these costs,
labor-intensive work,
Britain's
this
economy
market
will be worse
helped
off
make
than
Britain
before.
the prosperous superpower it
Every
became.
mention of Brexit causes the
Long
pound to
before the
lose
reign of
value,
Queen
so
Elizabeth
the death
II,
of a
the
world-famous national
1833
figurehead is sure to
Slavery
cause some
Abolition Act was
economic
introduced to abolish
uncertainty.
slavery in most British
The
colonies.
Queen is not just the
freeing
monarch of
thousands
the
of
UK but
enslaved
also of
Africans in the
Canada,
Caribbean and
Australia,
South Africa.
Jamaica, and a dozen other countries.
The modern Commonwealth emerged
She
from
is
the
head
British
of the
Commonwealth of
Commonwealth,
Nations,
too,
created
which
by the
includes
Balfour
nations
Declaration
such as
of
India and South
1926.
Africa.
Today,
Her image and
the King of the
influence
United
unite
Kingdom,
roughly
Charles
one-third of the
III,
world's
is still
population,
the monarch
and her
of
death may
15
well
out of
spell
the
the
56
end of that
Commonwealth
unity.
nations.
Australia has long had a powerful Republican movement.
Australia, the Bahamas,
Perhaps
Belize,
a
Canada,
new,
Grenada,
less popular
Jamaica,
monarch
New Zealand,
could push it over the
Papua New
edge.
Guinea, Street Kitts
Although
and
most
Nevis,
surveys
Street
suggest
Lucia,
that the
and
monarchy
Tuvalu,
remains
including
popular with the
UK
British
and India.
public, a new king
These
without the
countries
same
contain
history,
a total population
stability,
of around
or
2.2
recognition
billion
might
people.
change that.
However, 36 other
Historian
members
Greg
of the
Jenner has
Commonwealth are
claimed that
republics,
public
and 5
admiration
others
for
have
Queen
different
Elizabeth
monarchs.
is a massive factor in current
As the
support for
Commonwealth
the
nations
monarchy.
join the British people in mourning
She's
their
truly
late queen,
remarkable.
mixed feelings from
Few
former
believe
colonies
that
of
the
the
monarchy
empire
will
and questions
immediately
about
fall
the future
apart
of the
without her,
monarchy's role
although there
remain.
is speculation that public support will slowly
Operation
drop
London
off.
Bridge is the code name
Top
for the
10
plan
ways
for the
the late
funeral
Queen
of Queen
Elizabeth
II.
II's death will be
It
bizarre.
includes the announcement of her death, the
Jeremy
period of official
Corbyn,
mourning,
the current
and the
left-wing
details
leader
of
of the
her state
opposition,
funeral.
is a
The
Republican
plan was
after
created
all.
in the 1960s
That is,
and has been
he wants
revised
the
many
UK
times.
to be a republic.
Several other plans
We
have
doubt
been
that
created
he's
to
a
support the
GOP supporter.
implementation of Operation London Bridge,
James is an
such as
aspiring
Operation
writer,
Unicorn.
former history student,
Operation
and
Unicorn
all-round
details
generic
what would happen
stereotype.
if the Queen were to die in
You
Scotland.
can follow him on Twitter.
Operation London Bridge is
Read
running
more
concurrently
intriguing
with
facts
other
about the
operations
British
concerning
monarchy
King
on 10
Charles,
unexpected
the third
perks to
accession to the
becoming the
throne
Queen of
and his
England and
coronation.
top 10 embarrassing
Several
incidents
Commonwealth
involving the
realms have
British
developed their
monarchy.
own plans